Robert E. Freer. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Free Enterprise Foundation. The foundation was created in December of last year here in Charleston and as a think tank which is a cooperative effort. It's a separate 501c3, but we're a cooperative effort of both the Medical University of South Carolina, which I would like to thank very much Dr. Rosen for their hospitality this afternoon, the College of Charleston, and Earl Walker I'd like to thank, and Alec McMillan I'd like to thank very much for the participation by the Citadel. We were created as an independent, nonpartisan institute, and we're dedicated to preserving and promoting those enterprises and practices that are consistently the best in our free market economy. As we confront the departure from ethical standards by some of our most visible companies, never was the need clearer for an institute like ours. The foundation exists to facilitate within a collaborative community the answers to the new century's most pressing questions. The foundation believes our constitutional freedoms are inextricably bound to our economic freedoms. In preserving and strengthening the practice of free enterprise, we safeguard the principles of democratic freedom and government. And that is what our studies are designed both to illustrate, promote, and to provide tools of best practice to continually improve. The goals of the foundation are the education of the public on the vital role of free enterprise in answering the blessings of liberty and protecting and securing the blessings of liberty consistent with the highest standards of ethics, civic responsibility, and leadership. Through study, research, the founding of scholarships, publications, and awards for enterprise best practice, the foundation will foster the continuing vitality in the institutions that have created the basis for our prosperity. This lecture is the second in our series of lectures on best practice. We had one last spring on best practice and brand management. I'm very pleased to welcome to this podium today Kenneth A. Strassner, who is Vice President for Environment and Energy at Kimberly-Clark Corporation, which has a splendid program in environmental control and management. I thank Ken directly for making me look good the number of years that I was at Kimberly-Clark, and where Ken was really my right arm. And you know, I certainly understand the wisdom of being surrounded by people who are smarter than I am, and Ken is clearly that. He's a graduate of Yale undergraduate and Yale Law School, has experience in the federal government working at the Department of Labor, and has been at Kimberly-Clark. How many years now, Ken? 27 years at Kimberly-Clark. I'd like to welcome Ken to this podium, and I ask you to give him a warm hand. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin, and thanks everybody for waiting while we got the computers figured out. I'm not sure that I'm smarter than Robin, but I'm happy to be here anyway and to share with you what let's call a case study, how one big corporation is managing its environmental affairs. Let me start and give you a little background on the company, then talk a little bit about the policy framework that we use to manage environmental affairs, and then talk in a little bit more detail about the specific programs and objectives that we're currently pursuing. A little bit about Kimberly-Clark to start. We're a global consumer products company. Our sales last year were $15.4 billion on an enterprise worldwide basis. We sell our products in over 150 countries around the world. We have about 165 manufacturing facilities in 43 countries and currently about 69,000 employees. We like to think of ourselves as a company committed to product innovation, to brand leadership, and to environmental responsibility. The company defines its mission as enhancing the health, hygiene, and well-being of people every day, everywhere in the world. Our vision is to be the best at everything we do, and one of our 14 key objectives is to act as a responsible steward of the environmental resources that we utilize. Here's just a brief commercial for the products that we make. We're probably best known for Kleenex facial tissue, also for Huggies diapers, We also make a variety of medical products and products like Scott tissue and Scott napkins. We estimate that on a regular basis, 1 in 4 people in the world uses a Kimberly-Clark product every day. We have an interesting framework of corporate environmental policies, the most important of which is to conduct all of our affairs with what we call a sincere, balanced, and proper regard for the environment. We also seek to create throughout the corporation what we call a proper environmental ethic, and to make it a permanent part of the company's culture. We're also committed to continuous improvement in environmental performance by setting and achieving specific environmental objectives. We also have a framework of what we call implementing environmental policies, which are designed to fill the gaps of those more general statements we just talked about. They relate to things like environmental assessment measures and control procedures, sustainable use of natural resources, reduction and disposal of waste, and use and conservation of energy. 2 key things that drive our corporate environmental programs. The first isn't on this overhead, but let me just digress a minute. We're a company committed to what I call full and continuous legal compliance with environmental requirements wherever we operate. The only difference, I think, is that when Kimberly-Clark says full and continuous compliance, it's part of the corporate culture to carry that out. It's part of the company's tradition as a Midwestern American kind of straightforward company to do that, and frankly, we have very few problems in the world about meeting legal requirements. The other main driver we have is our corporate objectives program, and that's what the bulk of this presentation is about. Since 1995, we have set and worked towards achieving our own internal corporate objectives in the environmental area. We do it first to support the corporate environmental policies that I just talked about. We do it secondly to demonstrate the interrelationships between environmental and business issues. A third purpose is to teach the corporation to use its management skills on environmental issues, to use the same project and issue management skills we use on selling products to help us manage environmental issues. Fourthly, KC's CEO, recently retired, said that he needed, and this program would provide, what he called a structure and a strategy to proactively manage environmental issues for Kimberly-Clark. And finally, we're trying to demonstrate through this program our commitment to continuous environmental improvement. Let me start and tell you, we've had 2 of these objective programs, one called Vision 2000 and the new one, Vision 2005. And I'll show you first what we achieved under the Vision 2000 program, then talk a little bit about how Vision 2005 grew out of Vision 2000. Our first 2000 objective was to get to a uniform standard of wastewater treatment using best demonstrated technology at all of Kimberly-Clark's pulp, paper, and tissue mills around the world. We, in effect, set our own wastewater discharge standards. In about 2/3 of the countries where we operate, our standards are very consistent with local legal requirements. In about 1/3 of those 43 countries, our standards are stricter than the local laws and regulations. Whichever the stricter set of requirements is, that's the set of requirements that we manage and meet. Over the past 6 or 7 years, we have upgraded about 35 of our 73 plant wastewater treatment systems to comply with our own internal wastewater standards. In the process, we've spent a little bit over $200 million, a major investment by Kimberly-Clark. We developed an engineering and design approach with standard design modules, and we think that approach saved us about $20 million from what we otherwise would have spent to do these upgrades. Second objective was to establish at each facility an energy conservation program and to achieve on a facility basis a 10% improvement in process energy efficiency over 5 years. Total energy in, total product out. We achieved an 11.7% improvement over the 5-year period doing better than our 10% objective. In 2000, the company as a whole spent a little bit more than $500 million buying energy. If we hadn't have had this program, we would have spent $50 million more. So the program gave us an important operating cost savings. It's also helped us reduce our air emissions, and we estimate that our carbon releases have been reduced by 23.3% as a result of these efficiency improvements. The third objective was to, third objective was to reduce our use of toxic chemicals. We borrowed a list from the U.S. EPA of 17 priority toxics. Kimberly-Clark had participated in a voluntary U.S. program to reduce use and releases of those chemicals. We set a new objective to get an additional 50% worldwide release by the year 2000. And as you can see, we achieved an 87% reduction in use of these priority toxics over that time period. We're now to the place where, frankly, we use so little in the way of toxic chemicals that it didn't make sense to have another standard in this area. Our last objective was probably the most difficult. Because we're a consumer products manufacturer and because we make disposable products, we wanted to institute a culture of recycling in the company. And our objective was to eliminate all landfilling of non-hazardous manufacturing waste at our operating facilities by the year 2000. When I wrote these standards up for Kimberly-Clark's chairman, I wrote this one the first time and I said reduce by 50% the amount of waste going to landfill. Then came back the next morning with a big X through 50%, and the little note in the margin said this isn't tough enough. Next time I sent it back, I tried 67%. Same note came back the next day, said you got to, with a little addition that said, set the objective high. We set it at 100%. At the beginning of the program, we probably recycled 35% of our waste. We're now up to about 60. We have some additional work to do, particularly on wastewater treatment sludges that are the result of all those wastewater upgrades we made, which is a very difficult kind of waste to recycle. We figure that our recycling is now saving us about $24 million a year, either through avoided disposal costs or through revenue we get from recycled materials. And as I mentioned, particularly in places like Mexico and Latin America, we have some remaining technical challenges in recycling wastewater treatment sludges. All in all, that was a pretty successful program, and one of the penalties of corporate life is if you do something well, you get asked to do it again. So one Friday afternoon, the chairman of KC called me and said, how about another set of objectives for 2005? And he said, I'd like them by Monday morning if I could. I had been thinking about them, and we came up with a second set of objectives. Obviously, in continuing the program, we were hoping to build on our earlier success. We were also now viewing this program as, frankly, one of the key ways we could show them manage us. Here's a summary of what these 2005 objectives are. Having worked on improving wastewater treatment, the next logical area to go was to reduce our use of water in our tissue processes. The objective is to reduce processed freshwater use to achieve what we're calling world-class benchmark standards. Having made an additional effort in energy conservation, we said, well, let's work towards achieving best-in-class process energy efficiency as well. On solid waste, we have more work to do to get to that 100% recycling objective. And we set a new objective to reduce the total amount of transportation and final product packaging that we use by 10% over this 5 years. Finally, we wanted to establish at each of our manufacturing facilities a consistent and uniform environmental management system based on the ISO 14001 model. Well, why work on water reduction? Short answer is it's probably one of the world's most important environmental issues. The United Nations estimates that half the people in the world don't have easy or ready access to sanitary wastewater disposal, and that a quarter don't have ready access to safe water to drink. Of the 3.4 million people who die each year in the world from water-related disease, 3.4 million people die each year from water-related diseases, the largest single cause of disease in developing countries of the world. Water is also increasingly scarce. The World Resource Institute says that even today, 4 out of every 10 people in the world live in river basins or areas which are already experiencing water scarcity. And WRI says that by 2025, half the world's population will live in such areas. Finally, more than 20% of the world's known 10,000 freshwater fish species have become extinct, become threatened, or become endangered over the last several decades. So from an environmental perspective, processed water conservation is an important issue. It's also an important corporate strategic issue. We estimate that Kimberly-Clark uses 300 million cubic meters, 7,500 swimming pools full of water each year to make our pulp, paper, and tissue products. Without water, we can't make those products. In looking at our operations, we also discovered that our use of water varied from mills that were very efficient, using less than, say, 10 cubic meters to make a ton of tissue, to mills that used more than 120. It was, on the one hand, an essential process variable, and on the other hand, a variable that we weren't controlling very well. Reducing our fresh water usage also helps us conserve energy because we don't heat or pump that extra water, very often improves process efficiency, and allows us to make more efficient use of the significant capital investment we've made in wastewater treatment facilities. In short, water conservation is also about guaranteeing Kimberly-Clark's future access to the natural resource we use the most. Second objective, another program on energy efficiency. In 2002, that $500 million in energy spending had gone up to $584 million. We estimate that if each of our worldwide facilities were operating at these best-in-class target energy consumption levels, we could reduce those energy costs by $135 million a year. Even in a corporation our size, that's a tremendous cost savings opportunity. That $135 million a year in savings justifies spending, say, twice that amount, $200 to $300 million, to put energy conservation systems into our production processes. And obviously, reducing energy even further than the 2000 program continues to help us reduce facility air emissions and further reduces our carbon emissions. Landfill elimination, as I mentioned, has proven to be a hard standard, but we're persuaded that it helps our business to become a leading recycler among consumer products companies. We're saving a little more money, and we're now up to recycling about 65% of our total waste. Packaging reduction. Our thought here was that if we could execute planned and careful packaging reductions, we could have a significant savings potential. We spent in the year 2000 more than $660 million buying what we call finishing supplies, a Kleenex box, a plastic package to put diapers in, even more money than we spent on energy. If we can get a 10% reduction over this 5 years, that's $66 million in material cost savings. We estimate that we're a little less than half of the way there already. We're saving about $28 million a year through current package redesign efforts. In the consumer products business, finally, packaging reduction is one of the most important issues by which the public judges our environmental performance. And working on this helps Kimberly-Clark maintain its reputation as an environmentally responsible company. Well, finally, the objective is to put an EMS, an environmental management system, at every KC location. In a sense, the corporate environmental objectives I've just described to you are an environmental management system for the corporation as a whole. What we wanted to do is use those same principles so that we had a uniform approach to managing environmental issues at each of our operating facilities. Basic purposes: to try and assign environmental responsibilities to those in each mill in the best position to manage them. To move from a people-centered to a system-centered approach to environmental management. And finally, to use the EMS as a device to educate the entire facility team on the environmental issues that relate to their business. We think it'll take most of the 5 years to put an EMS system in at all 165 mills. What we've basically been doing over the last 2 years is to get the individual elements of an EMS system in place. First element, adopting a facility environmental policy statement consistent with the corporate objectives, but with a local focus as well on issues that are particularly important at that place. Second, the ISO paradigm has you conduct what are called initial environmental reviews, which is really a structured exercise to determine what your environmental impacts potentially are on the environment and to determine how you are managing those impacts at the moment. The priorities for this year have been to identify the gaps in current environmental management practices, to take the first dry run, if you will, at establishing facility-specific objectives and targets for environmental performance, to set up a system at each mill to communicate these targets to the facility team, to work to enhance the facility management's participation and active involvement in site environmental programs, and to create a system, finally, to monitor progress against the facility objectives that were set, and finally, to go through an annual reset process to set new targets for the next year. Priorities for next year are really to start up the system at each mill, to review their suggested objectives, to make sure all of the elements of the EMS system are up and ready to function. And we're going to try and track progress at each of our 165 locations against the objective the facility set. Well then, in summary, let me just give you a couple of key messages. How to run a good corporate environmental program? First, find ways to do what Kimberly-Clark has done, to create and reinforce a positive environmental ethic within the organization. It needs support from senior management. It needs to be an accepted corporate value throughout the organization. Second, I believe we've succeeded because we set a limited number of environmental objectives that made both good business and good environmental sense. Good business sense in helping us do our jobs more efficiently or helping us save money, control costs. Good environmental sense in addressing important environmental issues to the outside world. Third important effort, monitor and report progress in achieving these objectives to your senior executives, to your business managers, and to facility personnel generally. People have to see the progress that's being made. Finally, start the process again with input from all the facilities and people